Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's program. I'm very excited for tonight. We've talked about this for a long time, so the fact that it's actually happening is exciting. I'm Carolyn Waters, the director and head librarian here at the New York Society Library. As we begin our program, we acknowledge that the library stands on traditional lands of the Lenape people and other indigenous peoples to whom we pay respect. If you're new to the library, you may not be aware that we are celebrating our 270th year this year. We were founded in 1754 in a room in the old City Hall, which became Federal Hall. And our new exhibit celebrates our 270th anniversary. So I hope you will check out our website and come see the exhibit. In addition to our large collection of books, we have about 300,000 books in our collection, all here in this one building. We have other materials, special reading spaces, children's library, and other services. And we offer a full season of events like tonight. So I hope you will add yourself to our mailing list and come back again. If I could ask you to please silence your cell phones or anything that make noise, that would be most appreciated by our speakers, most especially. So we are so excited to host this program, The Lives of Others, as part of our Writing Life series, and to hear from these two fantastic biographers, award-winning biographers, Kelley and Debby Applegate. Biography is a huge reading interest of our members in particular, and I'm sure those of you who are here would say the same. And we have a whole book stack dedicated to the genre. Biographies and collective biographies are one of the areas that we have the largest share of nonfiction circulation and purchasing. So it is something that is of great interest here. Our moderator tonight is Diane Kiesel. She's recently retired after nearly 25 years as a judge on the New York Supreme Court criminal term. She spent a decade as a prosecutor working for the legendary Robert M. Morgenthau at the Office of the New York County District Attorney. Before attending law school, she was a journalist in Washington, D.C. for a group of California newspapers. She's the author of a textbook on domestic violence and a biography. Dr. Dorothy Boulding Farabee, civil rights pioneer. And we are eagerly awaiting her next book, which will come out in the fall, called When Charlie Met Joan, The Tragedy of the Chaplin Trials and the Failings of American Justice. So we're very eager to see that. So now I'm going to hand it over to Diane, who's going to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Carol. Welcome, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, we are very excited tonight because we are with two amazing biographers. Those who don't know them might say that these biographers were blessed with beginner's luck, but I know better. They were blessed with talent. Debby Applegate, to my left, Dr. Debby Applegate, more accurately, holds a PhD in American Studies from Yale, where she stalked the 19th century abolitionist, the Reverend Henry Ward Beecher, all over campus, and straight to a book and a Pulitzer Prize. Her first book, The Most Famous Man in America, made her famous, and rightfully so. To my right is Kelley. She's been writing successful biographies since her very first in 1978, Jackie O, which landed on the New York Times bestseller list, and so have at least 5, if not 6. Kitty, correct me if I've cheated you out of one of the others. Kitty writes about the cultural icons of our time, from Hollywood to Washington to the castles of Europe. Kitty leaves no stone unturned in getting to the heart and truth of her subjects. There's no doubt in my mind that if Kitty had been alive and writing in 1742, we would know definitively whether he chopped down that cherry. And she would know where he hid that library book that he never returned to the New York Society Library. All right, so this segues into my first question for Kitty. Kitty, all of your subjects are very much alive when you write about them. Why choose the living when the dead would be so much less troublesome.
You mean less troublesome, can you hear me? You mean less troublesome because the dead cannot sue. Whatever. Well, no, that's very big. That's terribly important. And it's harder to write about someone who's alive and abide by the rules and laws of libel and invasion of privacy. But I found that these people that I wrote about, they weren't just celebrities, they were titans of power. And I was fascinated by them and wanted to know how they got that power, how they maintained it, and how we as a society were influenced by it.
But am I correct? It's not just lawsuits. Didn't somebody from the Frank Sinatra camp offer to give you a good tanning? Is that, or maybe
Debbie, I think you've been reading the National. But yes, Frank Sinatra did sue me before I had written a word. And that was stunning. I called my publisher as soon as I found out that he brought suit. And the publisher said, we don't have a book. Call us when we have a book. I said, but I've just been sued by one of the most powerful. I was stunned. Publisher stepped away. And I went to these writers' groups, the American Society for Journalists and Authors, PEN, Washington Independent Writers, and I told them that I had been sued, I hadn't written a word. I would pay my own legal fees, but I was just, and they all were like this, oh, you'll pay your legal fees, is that right? And I said, yes. You just want us to stand up for you in the First Amendment. I said, yes. And they were like this, we're in. And so these writers groups came together. They held a press conference and they gave me the support I needed. That lawsuit went on for one entire year, cost me over $100,000. Finally, there was so much publicity about it after Bill Sapphire wrote a piece in the New York Times that Sinatra's lawyers said, let's come together and we'll have the suit and we'll dismiss the suit. And I said, what's the wheel? You sued. You kept this going you dropped the lawsuit. I'm not gonna do it. And they were, my publisher was like, and so Sinatra finally did drop it. However, what really frightened me was that during this back and forth, his lawyer said they had a tape recording of Kitty Kelley calling and misrepresenting herself and saying, Frank gave me your number and told me to call and I'd appreciate this and that. And they said they had a tape recording of it and they brought it to Washington and all the lawyers were there. And they put it on the tape recorder and it really did sound like Minnie Mouse on gas.
And that was not you, was it, Kitty?
It wasn't me. And all the lawyers went, oh, thank God, nothing to worry about. They all left except for my lawyers, who were O'Melveny and Myers, because Frank Sinatra had sued me in California. And I said, what am I supposed to do about that? And the leading partner said, just tape record everything. I said, you can't tape record everything. You just can't. And this was back in the 80s when things weren't so sophisticated. But I said, sometimes you're interviewing in a restaurant, things are clanking, people are talking. He said, oh, you'll figure it out. That really terrified me. And I did figure it out. And here's what I've done to save myself a lawsuit over and over. If you give me an interview, I am so grateful and we have a good time. And then I write you and I say, dear Diane, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me at the New York Society Library. It was such fun. Although we didn't have enough time, I didn't tell you how pretty that cameo pin you were wearing. It was just stunning. And I couldn't believe those sort of leopard skin shoes you have on. I really compliment your taste. Thanks so much. I hope to see you again. I would send that note to her and I would keep a copy. And I cannot tell you how many times, especially during the Bush book, people would stand up and say, I never talked to her ever.
Here's the thank you note. Well, this is obviously your worst experience as a biographer. Can you top that, Debbie?
Oh, no, I only deal in dead people. I don't have this kind of fortitude or charm. The few times I have spoken to people who are alive, I spend a lot of time alone. That I felt tremendous inner conflict because my first book was in the 19th century, so it didn't even come up really. But the second book was about a madam from New York City who only died in the 60s and died young. And so she knew quite a few people. And the one person I did speak to who I really felt genuinely conflicted about was her 90-something-year-old. She was a kind of a cousin-in-law, but they had known each other. She had married into the family. She had spent quite a bit of time with Polly Adler when she was young and running the highest-end brothels in New York of the 20th century. And she was telling me wonderful things. So I'm thinking, I'm an idiot. Why don't I deal with live people? Look, they just tell you stuff. Like, you don't have to go digging. What's the matter with me? And she's saying, oh, Polly used to come. She was my madam, was very conflicted about her mother ever finding out, obviously, about her profession.
Maybe you should tell everybody what that book was.
Polly Adler was a tremendously famous madam from the 20th century, from the Jazz Age, from the 1920 to 1945, and catered to, let's call it, most of the big men in the country, internationally as well, many politicians, many stars. You guys are all old enough to know some of these. Every once in a while I go around talking about Milton Berle or Desi Arnaz, and if it's a young enough audience, they're like, I don't know who this guy is. But you tell a good dirty story and they will perk up even if they don't know. So she's the 90-something-year-old lady, so she's telling me about how Polly would come over and bring her friends for Sabbath dinner out to Brooklyn with her mother. And such pretty friends Polly has. And she was naming names like people like, now we really are getting too old. The sweetheart, Ruby Keeler, that was the shocker. I was like, what? Ruby Keeler, how could that be? But, and she says Polly would take off her beautiful clothes and beautiful jewelry and get on the floor and scrub her mother's floor. And I thought, well, as a biographer, this is perfect peeping Tom material. This is wonderful. This is timing. So now I'm feeling great. So I said, well, so you did find out eventually what she did for a living, because Polly wrote a big memoir, as everyone should do. And I said, did you ever hear that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was one of her customers? You know, Saint Roosevelt. Even if you're a Republican, you probably still have a slight feeling of fondness for the Roosevelt name. She shrieks and says, I never want to talk to you again. Do not mention my name in your book, and slams down the phone. So I was like, no, I was right. Live people are nothing but trouble. And luckily, I took so long to finish the book, I'm pretty sure she passed away.
Well, mentioning Eleanor is very interesting because in
Oh, no, that was Franklin. Eleanor was not part of it.
Well, we're segueing into Eleanor now. I walked up to stack 7 in preparation for tonight, and I see along the wall a biography called Eleanor Roosevelt, another one called Eleanor and Franklin, another one called Eleanor and Hick, Eleanor in the Village, the FDR funeral train. There was even a book called What She Ate about what Eleanor Roosevelt, among other first ladies, ate. All I didn't see, I didn't manage to
Did not
find
eat well.
Eleanor on the toilet, but that might be next, okay? The question is, are there some subjects that we have just read enough about? What do you think as a biographer? Is there any subject that we don't need another book about?
Well, I'm just gonna
Either
say
one.
apropos of Eleanor, my editor, who's now retired, so he doesn't have to think about these things in real terms. Because I've been at loose ends, said, you should write an important book. Don't worry about money. Well, thanks, now you're retired. And just an important book. And I was like, what's an important book? And he called me up and he says, gotta talk to you last week. And he says, I think you should write a 1-volume biography of Eleanor Roosevelt. And I was like, oh, Lord.
So much for
So, either one, what makes a great biography? Kitty, what makes the biography worth reading, worth going back to?
I think it's a life story. And it's a life that matters and had consequence and affected the lives of other people. How and why did it affect other people? I cringe anytime I'm described as a celebrity biographer. It's like,
Yeah.
because I think it sort of lowers the subject and the pursuit. It sounds like it's movie magazine writing. The books I've written have taken 4 years of my life. It's like a college education. I cared about them. I cared about each one. I felt that they were very, very important. So I think you have to believe that a biography matters, a life story matters. And I happen to believe that doing it in an unauthorized way so that you don't owe anything to the family, to the heirs, to the subjects. You tell the truth as it's given to you. Now, you all know this, that every time you get a truth and you get it from 3 different people, it's 3 different truths. Because I found out writing about Sinatra, I had a story regarding Frank Sinatra and Lana Turner, a story regarding Frank Sinatra and Ava Gardner, both from their points of view. And I just put them both in. This one said this and this one said that. And here's how it ended up, and you make up your mind.
Your unauthorized biographies, which you just touched upon, in your books, do you reach out and try and make contact with the
This is a serious question, I hope.
Oh, yeah.
I don't start a book until I write that person and say, dear Judge, so I'm writing this book. I'm under contract to Simon & Schuster. I admire your life, your accomplishments. I want you to know that I'll be doing this and interviewing as many people as I can around you who knew you, who interacted with you. Absolutely. And then I go back. And by that time, they've either called their lawyer.
Well, that was my next question. How many of them have said yes?
Oh, none. They would put me out. They put me out of business. Absolutely put me out of business if they said yes.
I find that phrase unauthorized biography very irritating.
It is
I've
irritating.
never written an authorized biography.
Well, they're
You
not
are-
around to authorize it.
I'm sure they wouldn't have liked it, though, I can tell you that much. I guarantee you.
Nobody wants.
I don't want anyone. Someone is gonna write a biography of you,
I'm
Kitty.
sorry.
Someone will write a biography of you, Kitty. So you should be prepared. You can but it's true. Why would you want someone to delve into to read your mail, to go through if I could go through every one of my subject drawers, I would. It's a terrible thing being a professional peeping Tom. It is not respectable, but it is a lot of fun, I can say.
One of the, and I don't know if this affects your work as much as it affects Kitty, you just touched on it when you said you get several versions of a story depending on who you speak with. Often when you're writing a biography, you have to go through the lies to get to the truth. And how do you find?
Wait, what do you mean, go through the lies? You're assuming? Who tells the lies?
Well, in the biography that I wrote, I had a number of, my own subject had spent much of her life putting forth a certain image.
They all do.
Well, so
Absolutely.
those are the lies.
If I wrote about myself, I'd say, she's 5'8". See, look at y'all now. And I'd say she weighs about 90 pounds. Yeah, really. So you start with that premise that whatever you're looking at should be looked at carefully.
With a big grain of salt.
And sometimes the story, what I like about biography is besides the actual influences, who the subject touched and what effects they had, I also feel like biography is a great way to tell a big story about history.
No question.
And so you can open up, you can get people who will focus on a single subject in a way that they would never sit down and read a whole tome about slavery in the 19th century.
But you know, Debby, that's why if you define yourself as a historian, that's more respectable than defining yourself as a biographer.
Isn't true. And I do.
I don't. That's the reality right now.
That's
That's why I always support biographers and what they're doing, because it's serious.
Well, except that that's what people buy. People are not going out and buying tons of history for the most part. They're buying really beautifully written biographies, I think. Well, those who read books or don't check them out.
You said that each of your books takes about 4 years of your life, okay? And so I guess the question becomes, for those people in the audience who aren't writing biographies, describe for us, what are you doing in those 4 years? How are you prepping for your biography? What kind of research are you doing?
Well, first I hold the publisher up for a vast amount of time. Then I spend probably the first year reading everything I can about this person, and I make a chronology. Not a judgmental chronology, a chronology of dates. Born 1910, blah, blah, blah. And by the time I'm done with that research, I have about 50 to 100 page chronology of the person's life. So I will go to interview someone, and the figures I've had are larger than life, so they make assumptions that perhaps are not serious. And then I pull out my chronology and I say, excuse me, you said that in 1948, that Queen Elizabeth did such and such, but look at this, and you will look at my chronology and you'll see 50 to 100 pages put together of dates. Oh no, I remember this. Oh, that's in. And what it does is open up the interview, because the interviewee will look at the date and say, oh, I remember so-and-so told me such and such happened with this and with that. So that's how I do it. I don't get every single interview I ask for. And I will tell you, and I'll hurry, when I was doing the Sinatra book, Frank Sinatra had applied for a license in Las Vegas, a gambling license. And on that license, he had to declare that he had never been arrested and he had never done time in jail. Well, I found out that he had, and I was kind of curious about it. It was in 1959, and they called it a morals charge. Ooh, morals charge. Well, so I found out what a morals charge was. Then I had to get the arrest record. Then I had to find out what happened. Finally, the woman's name was Anna Maria something, a very long Italian name. By the time I found her, her name was Grace Barentis. Then my friend said, okay, call her. I was afraid to call her because if I said I wanted to talk to her about, maybe she'd hang up. Okay, write her a letter. No, she, I didn't know what to do. Finally, I called this friend of mine and he said, okay, don't be an idiot. Just go to Lodi, New Jersey and knock on her door. And I said, I'm sorry. Knock on her door without being asked. He said, you're not in the junior league anymore. Just go to Lodi, New Jersey. Oh, I was so scared. Anyway, a friend drove me to Lodi, New Jersey, and he said he'd wait in the car for me. I couldn't get out of the car. I was scared to death because I wanted this interview so much. And if she said no to me, she was the only person who could verify. I finally got the nerve. I went to the door. I rang the doorbell and she came to the door. And I said, Ms. Carabinas, my name's Kelley, and there were no periods in my sentences, just ran. And I was afraid you wouldn't talk. She said, honey, you're so nervous. Why don't you come in?
Good job, good job.
3 hours later, I walked out, and I was so full of myself. Good work.
Are you the one who found Frank Sinatra's mugshot then?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is now one of the most famous and most well purchased, well done. I would just say I love my chronology. My chronologies are longer than yours because I didn't live through my circumstances, so I have to spend a lot more time trying to figure out what
But
was
don't you
important.
find that people appreciate the scholarship and time that went into that, and they can correct certain things?
Oh, and not only that, they give you ideas where you know something happened, something that's important, but you don't really know why or what it meant.
Oh,
or
so and
why
so
did
did
it
tell you
happen.
that.
And all of this, well, if you don't have someone to tell you, because they're dead, that looking at the chronology, if you have things around it, oh, well, it turns out that was the day his mother's house burnt down, or that was the day, surprise, surprise, his girlfriend got married, or whatever it was. And you'd be amazed how much it's like I'm sure you would know, but I mean, I'm sure this would not surprise any of you. That's the Sherlock Holmes part. That's the fun part of biography. That is the.
I don't know.
She likes
I don't
when
know
the
about
holding up for money
fun part.
part.
The
That's
fun part is when you can do the author's note. That's the last thing. That's the last thing.
Debby, you started out as an academic, and your book that won the Pulitzer started out as
A
a
dissertation.
dissertation. How did you turn a dissertation into something that anybody would want to read?
Long and painfully, I actually, it was a promising subject. Henry Ward Beecher, if you're from Brooklyn Heights, you might know him. His church still stands. He was a anti-slavery activist. He was the little brother of Harry Beecher Stowe. He's got a big statue right in Brooklyn, the Borough Hall. And so I thought he had legs, you know, the way he was a celebrity. If I had written about him at the time, of which there were many biographies at the time, I would have been a celebrity, but I am a celebrity biographer in both cases. And nobody authorized me. That he, I'm sorry, now I'm gonna go excited about Henry. In my mind, how did I turn it in?
Yeah.
Well, so because he was a good subject, and because I knew enough how to write, I had an agent who had just switched from being an editor. Literally, I was her first client, and she helped me write a really wonderful proposal. In fact, I'm sure more people have ever read that proposal than my books because it's in her best-selling book about how to be an editor, Thinking Like Your Editor. So I sold it, but I didn't have the first idea. So I turned in the first 2 chapters, maybe 3, and they canceled my book contract at HarperCollins. Yes, it was quite, and since I had held them up for an unreasonable amount of money, not Kitty Kelley money, but still good money. It would have paid her Frank Sinatra law bills, that I had to pay back. And so otherwise I surely would have given up. So I had to sell the book again. And so this was in the early 2000s when nonfiction writing was much less of a topic that was taught. You would not find handbooks, or you would not find master's programs or anything like that. So I thought, well, what is it that is my goal here? I can say it's to tell a big story. I can say it's America needs to know. But really, what is a writer doing? A writer is asking for your attention and asking you to turn the page, or read the next paragraph, or even read the next line. And what makes people read the next line or turn the page? It's suspense. It's wondering, what next? What's going to happen? And so I read a bunch of books about how to write thrillers and how to write suspense novels. My favorite one was Action, Conflict, Suspense. And it had very basic or exercises. You know, the who, what, when, and where. What do they want? What's the protagonist want? What's thwarting them? And what's the 5-act structure? And I just, even now when I'm writing, sometimes I will pull out those old basic exercises and use them to focus what I'm doing. So really, I did it the old-fashioned way by failing and then figuring it out. Yeah, figuring it out. Yeah.
Is there any place for biography anymore when we can get into our, we can turn on our computer and poke in somebody's name and everything in the world you want to know about that person jumps out at you?
I think that in the world of AI, information, I think we have become increasingly accurate in our public information as we have gotten more information at our fingertips. I think we're moving into an era where information will be much harder to vet. I think, I don't know, what do you think? That there's a lot of misinformation increasingly out there?
Yes, there is, but I still think there's room for books, room
Precisely for that reason.
for biographies. I remember when I did the Oprah Winfrey biography, the publishing lawyers would come down and vet my manuscripts, and I happened to have the same lawyers on Oprah that I had had before on previous books. And it was a woman, she was very smart, and she brought this young man with her. And they sat down and she said, Kitty, this interview that you have with Vernon Winfrey, Oprah's father, do you have, and the man interrupted her and said, yes, do you have notes and do you have a tape recording? And she went like this to him. Careful, she's probably got a picture of herself with her. And I said, Kathy, I heard that. I do happen to have a picture. And she said, no. I said, I do. So I went upstairs, I got everything. And she said, will you show me the picture? I said, well, I'll show it to you. So I showed her a picture of me interviewing Oprah Winfrey's father. And he's whispering in my ear, and I am leaning over. It was in Mississippi in July, and my hair is matted. And the blazer pulls and shows off. And she said, Kitty, we have to use that picture. I said, no, we're not using that. And she said, no, we really have to use it. I said, why? I mean, no one has ever questioned my accuracy. They might question other things, the audacity to write what I do, but not the accuracy. She said, this is over. She said, her father will deny it. I said, how can he deny it? End of story. The publishing lawyer won. That picture of me went in the first paragraph of the New York Times. Thank you. And she even publishes a picture of herself interviewing. You can't win.
Let me clarify, I think all the more biographies are important.
I really do.
Because I like Wikipedia, actually, I am a fan of Wikipedia, I find it to be mostly quite accurate. But, that may become less and less true as time goes on.
Well, you have to really care about the dynamics of a life story. I mean, Wikipedia is great because you get you get a quick glimpse of the person's life. But if you really want to know what motivated them, how they accomplished what they did, where they went, I think you need biography.
Let me ask a question about your celebrity, Kitty. Do you think your celebrity has ever interfered with your ability to write about someone else?
Diane,
Are you
get a grip.
Are you
Really?
I'm serious? Are you too famous to be able to write about somebody? I don't think so. You know what I'm asking.
Oh, I have been urging, you are barely scratching the surface of her interesting stories. She's got a good one about the JFK mountain, somebody like a rooster. And that's just I'm not gonna go down that road now.
No, you're talking about the interview with Senator George Smathers.
She's got a
I
million.
had a wonderful interview with Senator Smathers. It took me months and months to get it. It was when I was writing the biography on Jackie O. And he finally gave me an interview because his secretary felt so awful about all the times he canceled. He gave me an interview. It lasted for a really long time. I only had one question. I wanted to know how Senator Smathers got John F. Kennedy to come back from the south of France after the 1956 presidential campaign when he lost for vice president. That was the only question I had. This interview went on so long. At one point, Senator Smathers said, and this is a quote, "Well, Jack was just like a rooster getting on top of a hen real fast. That's how he made love." And I said, Senator, no, I was really offended. I said, how could you possibly know that unless you were in the room? He said, well, of course I was in the room. He said, Jack just loved doing it with other people around.
That's what I did.
Then, okay, 3 hours later, I went home with this explosive interview and I started to tell my husband about it. My husband said, "This is disgusting." I said, "I know it is, but anyway, I put most of it in the book." And it was 14 years after the death of the president, but still, there was a real veil of reverence around John F. Kennedy and his image.
And you're really the first person who brought up these issues of his
Womanizing.
womanizing. I mean, without
Well, and the Washington Post called Senator Smathers, fully expecting Senator Smathers to say, "It's a lie, she made it up." The reporter read him everything. Smathers said, "Well, I guess I was just run over by a dumb-looking blonde."
So Bob Caro has Robert Caro has a autobiography essays. You could put him in the dust. I'm pretty sure you could put Bob Caro in the dust with an author. I've been saying a memoir. It needs to happen. You don't want to leave this to somebody else to do.
You don't trust anybody else to do it, do you?
Who wants to read it? Go on.
Before we open this to
questions, if there's anybody in the world, dead or alive, you could write about, Who would it be?
You have caught me at a wrong time because I was just saying I don't feel like doing a damn thing. And I was talking to my therapist, I had to go back to therapy to talk about the fact that I'm perfectly content doing nothing. And realizing that he says, let's talk about your values. And, because I think he was at a loss, since you seem happy, what are you doing here? And he said, he says, what do you care about? And I said, well, I like my two biggest values, besides, of course, my loved ones, contentment and thinking. And he says, wow, that's great. How could you be content and be thoughtful without writing another book? And I was like, oh no, writing a book and contentment are completely incompatible. So you are asking exactly the question I'm paying a great deal of money for me to figure out. I am not sure.
Well, let me put it this way then. What do our subjects say about ourselves? When you choose to write about Pollyanna, or you choose to write about the Reverend Henry Ward Beecher, what does that say about you? Why do you pick them?
You would think that I was just a dirty-minded young woman, and not so young. But really, I was thinking about it. I was listening at one point to Robert Caro talk about how he became, some of you may have heard him talk about this, how did he become interested in Robert Moses? He wanted to know about the workings of power, and that has driven all of his books. And I have never given it some sort of larger analytical thought about what connects my interests. But I think you also mentioned power, and I was thinking, but why? I don't find sex, my Reverend Lord Beecher also had a sex scandal. So if I'm surprised, what am I doing in this? I actually am a matronly woman who does not live a very exciting life. My biggest, bourgeois thing is to not wear a bra most of the time, which is not much. And so then I was thinking, what am I doing? And I thought, I think my first taste of power came as a young girl who was cute and friendly and found at the age of 12 or 13 men or older males being interested in somehow sensing that there was something here that I did not understand, but that it was bringing something to me. Now it's a power. What kind of power is that? You can do, that's a good question. But nonetheless, I thought it was my first taste of something like power. And I always thought, this is ridiculous. You don't know me. I'm 12, I'm 16, I'm 25. This is just something about sexual thoughts, something about sexual desire is both a driver of power and a thwarter of power. And I came to adulthood in the age of Bill Clinton. And I remember thinking that he could not have done this at the beginning, because who would work so hard his whole life and throw it away for, cheap sex? Well, it turns out many men will do that. And I think there's some part of me that still finds that conundrum of what are these deep desires doing that constantly get in the way of our more conscious willpower, I think. Maybe that's part of it.
Any thoughts on that?
I just got carried away with you as a 12-year-old.
There's nothing like being 12 and being mostly a bookish girl, and all of a sudden, you're a pretty blonde. That happens.
Before we open up to questions, what is your favorite book of all of the books you've written? Do you have one? Does one stand out as being a really good, positive experience for you?
Yes, my checkbook.
Well, she's basically shut me up. Anybody have any questions for either of our excellent panelists? Ms. Christian.
This is for Ms. Kelley. So 2 weeks ago, Maureen Dowd wrote her column, and she provided a link to an article that you wrote about Joe Biden when he was a very young senator, I think newly became a widower. And I thought it was a fascinating read, and it was my opinion. So now, fast forward to he was running for president, I think he ran other times. But is there, from thinking back when you wrote that to now, do you like, I really got it? Was there anything that surprised you when he became president or when he became vice president? Any surprises from what that piece was? And that was before he did American
Great
Life.
question, great question.
She's referring to a piece that I wrote for the Washingtonian magazine, I think it was in 1974. And the senator, newly elected senator, had not given an interview, and he agreed to give one to me. And I went to the office, and he was garrulous. And he pointed out, the 35 pictures of his wife all over, and talked about her and what a wonderful sex partner she was. And it was quite extraordinary. And I think in a sense, he's kind of the same guy. Oh, baby, I was never allowed back in the office again. It was 15 years before he ever gave an interview to anybody outside of Delaware. But it was quite an interview.
So those who say that he is not doing a lot of press because he's older, you think, no, he was always that guy. He was
He was
always.
always that guy.
It was
He really was. There were just no, what do you call them? Governors. No blinkers. And I think he's gone through life winning by being so personable. And most of us would say that those people who are open take a burden off of all of us, because most people are defensive. We don't want to say this, we don't want to. And he's, hey, I'm blah. And you kind of relax with him. And I think this has been a secret of Biden's success. Yes, he is 81. I noticed the gait isn't as good. He had hair. Who's
Plugs.
Plugs.
Yeah. And a little bit of
Yeah, little eye dots.
Do you know, I'm sorry, I know there are other questions, but I think one of the things about reading biography is the lesson is often the case. I am attracted to characters who are open about themselves, or at least mostly open. And when they get in trouble, they don't get in as much trouble because they don't seem like they were trying to fake. They get, somehow it's a little, people are more forgiving if they thought that's.
So especially politicians, because they have this public image.
Right.
To uphold.
Any other questions?
I have a question for Ms. Kelley, only because it's about a lot of people.
Yeah, fair enough.
You mentioned 4 years in writing a book. Now, especially with the internet, with social, were you ever derailed halfway through with somebody sniffing out or scooping something that you were writing about? And if so, how did you deal with that?
She had them killed.
That's not even funny. I don't even scratch the tape.
Not a Vanity Fair or something like that scooped you, or were you ever derailed sort of in your process?
Yes, I have
Okay.
had people do that. And I get hysterical about it. But I just kept going. And remember, I was writing and interviewing before the internet, which is why I have so many notebooks. And now we can get an awful lot off the internet that we couldn't have gotten. On the other hand, there are many, many newspaper clippings that I have, having done the research that I did, of newspapers that are no longer in existence, and they would be valuable to a library that's still.
Are you giving your papers somewhere? What are you gonna do with your papers?
How do you pronounce that? Giving?
So they'll find out where they
If
go.
I may follow up on that though, if you found someone going down the same path as you did you then stop the book? Or did you just keep going saying, I'm gonna write a better book and nothing's stopping me? How did you deal with that?
Diane, I have never had that kind of confidence. I have never said, I'm gonna write a better book, if only. I remember when a writer, I forget his name now, thank God for age, but I think it was David McClintock, was going to write a book on Frank Sinatra. And as I told you, the research just to put together a chronology to go out and do the interviews. And for the books I've done, especially the last few, I've had to interview hundreds of people. And when I heard that this man was doing a book on Sinatra, well, I thought, this is it. I can't do it. That's it. And I remember my husband said, okay, you can get the vapors for 24 hours. And then you're back to it.
I think best is always better than first.
Hmm?
Best is always better than first.
Fran,
Hi.
hi.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all. This is really so special and really very entertaining as well. And I didn't think it would be this entertaining.
Neither did we.
Oh, I-
Boring life. So, no, serious question. So, for all of our authors, have you had confronted factual information about your subjects that you did not include in your work because you thought, in the case of living people, it would be hurtful? It would be, you consider the impact on others of that information, or in some way, in terms of history, do we need to know? And I'll tell you, when I first thought about this was I do love biographies, and I read Florence Henderson's book. Biography, and I thought, oh, great, I'm a kid of the 60s, this is great, let me read about her life, terrific. And she mentioned that she had an affair with Lindsay, and, and she got some, venereal disease from the affair. And I thought, I don't know if we need to know that. So.
But you were reading an autobiography.
You're right, it was an autobiography. You're right. No, that is the distinction. But have you had that, like, did you come across some information?
I did, and recently too, when I did the Oprah Winfrey biography, I interviewed her father, and I interviewed cousins and her aunt, Catherine. And Oprah, let's see, her aunt Catherine told me who Oprah's real father was, but she told me on condition that I would never tell. And I gave her my word of honor, I would never tell. And I spent a few days in Mississippi with her and with Oprah's father and so forth and so on. And I didn't put it in the book, but Catherine called me and she said, you do remember your promise? I said, I do remember. Now, the book came out, and at about the same time, Bob Woodward revealed who his source was for all the president's men, because the source had died. I can't do that. I gave my word of honor, and that means whether you go to the angels or you still stay here, my word of honor is my word of honor. Well, that became a problem when Oprah wanted to know. And I was contacted through her representatives, and I said, first of all, I gave my word of honor, can't do it. But let's be clear, we don't know that maybe her aunt knew the exact, we don't know, so forth and so on. But yes, I have come across that, and it's tough. I do believe if you promise something, you keep the promise. And because I remember, and I had words with Woodward on this when his book on the Supreme Court came out, and Potter Stewart was a justice, and Potter Stewart died, and then Bob revealed who his source had been. It was a living hell for Mrs. Stewart. It was just awful for her. So, I don't know, do you have?
Oh, nothing so dramatic. I'm actually the one that I still feel a little embarrassed about. You get attached to your people, even if the more you understand them, the more you appreciate the flaws, the more presumably you chose somebody whose company you enjoyed more or less. And you become not more sympathetic, but at least more in tune with them. And I remember in my first biography, Herman Melville had written his least successful novel, in which a lot of it was a dialogue between Henry Ward Beecher and Ralph Waldo Emerson. As you can imagine, not a barn burner of a novel. But it's clear that in the end but I am talking a little bit about optimism versus pessimism in the age of the Civil War. And there is a point at which Melville makes a joke about they're on a steamship, like going up and down the Mississippi, and he makes a joke about the Henry Ward Beecher character carrying a life preserver that is clearly meant to be a toilet, like a toilet seat, and he's clearly making a point that this is a bunch of bullshit about his optimism. And by that point, I just thought, that's just vulgar. I'm not putting that in. Nobody cares, but I know that I didn't put it in because for a moment I had a rare moment of being ladylike, and I thought, well, it comes to nothing. It's certainly not of any of that. But that's one of the reasons I am not simply afraid of being sued. It is really also the feeling that I think I am very susceptible to not wanting to hurt people's feelings, and it makes me nervous to talk to people and do exactly what you're doing.
People's feelings?
Yeah, I mean, no, but drawing them out in ways that then they're gonna have no control over how it goes out into the world and how it's perceived.
You know something, when I wrote the book on the Bush family dynasty, it was 3 generations. Prescott Bush, senator from Connecticut, George Herbert Walker Bush, and then George W. Bush. And I quoted something from a book that President George Herbert Walker Bush had written. He denied writing the book. He called the Rhode Island newspaper and said, "This Kitty Kelley cannot be trusted. I didn't write this book." The reporter from Rhode Island then called my publisher. The publisher gets the legal on the telephone. They said, "Kitty," and I said, and for a minute when everyone tells you, I thought, maybe I snapped my cap. And I went and got the book, and at that time, they said, fax the cover up immediately. Fax the cover up, and President Bush, this time he didn't talk to the Rhode Island guy. He had his secretary call, and she said, well, President Bush forgot that he wrote that book.
He was so full of books.
But he still stands by the fact that this Kitty Kelley is terrible.
On that note, I didn't realize Kitty was like a one-person employer of lawyers.
Exactly.
There's some lawyers in the audience, we please know. Any last question to wrap this up? All right. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask you a question about the Bush family. I have a very boring cruise to Alaska. And
I'm sorry?
You saved me with that Bush book that was in the library. And the interviews were mind-boggling, the information, because they sort of,
This wonderful woman read the Bush book.
Go to all these different people, and and obviously it was when the family was very current.
I interviewed hundreds of people for that book. I had to. Connecticut, Washington, Texas. And when it came out, George W. Bush was in the White House. So you can imagine the fury that came down from the Republican National Committee, from the deputy press secretary, from the White House press secretary. They all said it was lies, terrible, awful. And I do remember walking into a restaurant in Washington with, well, first tell you, when you write life stories, you start identifying with your subject. I mean, after I wrote Jackie O, I started dressing better. When I wrote Liz Taylor, I got divorced.
That's funny because mine, I started to think Presbyterians, real stiff necks. I mean, it's not anywhere near as much fun. Sorry.
And so I went into a restaurant late one night with the man who did become my husband, but we walked in and a man stood up. It was 9 o'clock at night, and from Washington DC, where I live, that's really late. And this man stood up in the back and started booing. Get her the F out of here. Get her, screaming. And all of a sudden, a woman from way back there stood up and said, no, she's brave, she's brave. And then he started yelling at her. Called her a bad word. Her husband stood up. And so they're screaming at each other. And I remember John looked around to see what lowlife was, attracting. I just looked straight ahead and I thought, please God, do not let me cry. Do not let me cry. And they came and they sat us down in the middle of the and all of a sudden the man got up from the back and he came towards us and he had his arms out like this, and I thought, this is it. This is it. And he came up and put his arms like this and he said, Kitty, you don't know me, but I'm going to stand here until this stops. He said, what you did was very, very brave. And by this time, John's into the wine menu. And I said, honey, I said, you are the majority leader of the House of Representatives, right? Tony Coelho? He said, yes, I am. I said, honey, he put his, I said, I want to introduce you to Congressman Coelho. And John looked at him and said, you go in the will.
Thank you. They were great. Give them a hand.